The sun hung low over the Laotian mountains, bleeding into the mist like a watercolor no one meant to paint. Down in the valley, a twin-engine C-123 Provider thundered off a dirt airstrip that didn't exist on any map. Its wings flexed under the weight of cargo that officially didn't exist either. The pilot's shirt was unbuttoned, his boots mismatched, his co-pilot barefoot. On the radio, silence. Because what was there to say? This was Air America, the airline that wasn't an airline, flying a war the United States wasn't supposed to be fighting. It looked, at first glance, like any other cargo outfit. Weathered planes, contract pilots, company logos painted in fading blue. But behind the hangars, behind the ledgers and the cheerful public facade, sat an invisible owner, the Central Intelligence Agency. Air America wasn't so much a company as a cover story. On paper, it was a privately owned charter service registered in Delaware. In practice, it was the CIA's Air Force. Its pilots smuggling in agents, hauling out refugees, dropping supplies, and occasionally delivering the kind of packages no customs agent would ever approve. The idea was simple. The CIA needed to move men and material through countries where the U.S. Air Force wasn't supposed to operate. So they built their own airline, a ghost carrier. It had shareholders, board meetings, even an HR department, all the things that make something look legitimate while being anything but. The payroll was real enough. The job titles weren't. If your paycheck said Air America, odds were you worked for the agency, whether you admitted it or not. By the early 1960s, Air America had hundreds of aircraft. C-46 Commandos, C-47 Skytrains, C-123 Providers, Pilatus Porters, and Bell helicopters, scattered across Southeast Asia like poker chips on a losing table. They flew out of places that didn't officially exist, with clearance codes that were never filed. The pilots joked that the only difference between them and smugglers was that smugglers got to keep what they carried. In the jungles of Laos, that fine line between civilian contractor and covert operative blurred into nothing. Air America pilots were technically civilians, but they took orders from the CIA's Special Activities Division. Their cargo ranged from sacks of rice to crates of rifles, sometimes both in the same load. They flew unarmed and unescorted through enemy airspace, often into valleys so narrow they had to spiral down like flush toilet water to land. If a plane went down, there were no recovery teams, no military funerals, just another line on a list marked denied. The company's origins were as improbable as its missions. Air America began as Civil Air Transport, founded by General Claire Chennault, the Flying Tigers guy, after World War II. When Mao's communists took over China, CAT became a lifeline for the nationalists retreating to Taiwan. That's when the CIA noticed them. A ready-made fleet full of combat-tested pilots flying in a region about to become the next Cold War playground. So the agency quietly bought the company through a series of front corporations. CAT became Air America in 1959, a name change that sounded like marketing, but was really just another layer of deniability. Officially, the U.S. government had nothing to do with it. Unofficially, the White House, Pentagon, and Langley all used it as a Swiss Army knife in the air. Need to insert a CIA case officer into Cambodia? Call Air America. Want to resupply any guerrilla army in Laos? Call Air America. Have to extract a downed pilot from a jungle full of Viet Cong? You guessed it, call Air America. If it involved risk, plausible deniability, or a total absence of rules, these were your people. The men who flew for Air America were a breed apart. Some were ex-Air Force or Navy pilots looking for another adrenaline fix. Others were drifters, mercenaries, or ideologues chasing paychecks or redemption. They were given call signs instead of ranks and paid cash in envelopes. There were stories of pilots making emergency landings on jungle roads, kicking out the cargo, and flying off before the dust settled. A few made fortunes. Many didn't live long enough to spend it. From the ground, villagers saw the silver fuselages streak across the sky and assumed they were angels, or devils, depending on what came out of the cargo bay. To the CIA, those same aircraft were chess pieces in a shadow war. To the pilots, they were flying coffins held together by duct tape and whiskey. The maintenance crews used spare parts scavenged from wrecks, and yet somehow the planes kept flying. Maybe it was skill, maybe it was luck, maybe the devil takes care of his own. Every mission came wrapped in euphemism. Humanitarian delivery might mean ammunition for tribal fighters. Emergency extraction might mean evacuating a CIA agent who'd overstayed his welcome. Reconnaissance support could involve dropping off assassins with fake passports. The paperwork was immaculate. The reality was chaos. And then there was the strange thing about Air America's reputation. It wasn't a secret to everyone. Reporters whispered about it, soldiers traded stories, and even foreign governments pretended not to notice. Everyone knew the U.S. had an airline in Laos. They just couldn't admit it. The fiction was part of the function. By not existing, Air America could do everything official policy forbade. That was its genius and its curse. Back in Washington, bureaucrats and generals congratulated themselves on their ingenuity. They had created a tool that could fight a war without a declaration, supply allies without treaties, and deny everything with a straight face. But every time a plane went down or a pilot disappeared, the line between necessity and madness blurred a little more. Air America was the perfect symbol of Cold War logic. To preserve freedom, they built an empire of secrecy. As one pilot later said, "We weren't heroes, we weren't villains, we were just the only airline where losing your luggage meant losing your soul." Long before it became the CIA's favorite airline, Air America had a different name and a much more straightforward mission: make money by flying anything that could fit through a cargo door. It began in the ashes of World War II, when General Claire Chennault, the cigar-chewing showman who led the Flying Tigers, decided peace was bad for business. With his wartime fame and a head full of half-finished dreams, he and Whiting Willauer, a U.S. diplomat turned entrepreneur, founded Civil Air Transport, or CAT, in 1946. CAT's original goal was as idealistic as it was naive: help rebuild China's shattered infrastructure by delivering mail, passengers, and supplies. But the post-war Chinese Civil War had other plans. By 1949, Mao's communist forces were swallowing territory faster than CAT's DC-3s could take off. Chennault's operation found itself flying refugees, nationalist gold, and government officials out of collapsing cities. Every flight became an evacuation, every runway a potential last stand. When the nationalists finally retreated to Taiwan, Chennault's airline was broke, overextended, and sitting on a fleet of aging transports nobody wanted. That's when the CIA came knocking, quietly. America's new intelligence agency, born in 1947 and already dabbling in covert adventures from Greece to Guatemala, saw something useful in CAT, a ready-made air force that could go anywhere the Pentagon couldn't. In 1950, the agency did what it does best. It bought CAT through a web of shell corporations, so tangled even the accountants couldn't follow it. The official owner became the Airedale Corporation, a Delaware holding company with no offices, no staff, and a P.O. box shared with half a dozen other CIA fronts. The cover was perfect. CAT would continue flying as a civilian airline, but its real clients now had names like Office of Policy Coordination and Far East Division. The Korean War sealed the deal. When the conflict erupted, CAT pilots found themselves hauling everything from ammo to pork rations into rough-cut airstrips along the front. They wore civilian clothes and flew unmarked aircraft, technically not part of the U.S. military. If they were shot down, Washington could shrug and say, "Never heard of them." The CIA learned two things from that experience. First, contract pilots were cheaper than soldiers. Second, plausible deniability flew better without stars and bars on the wings. Chennault didn't live to see what his airline became. He died in 1958, the same year the CIA quietly shifted CAT's operations deeper into Southeast Asia, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, right as those countries began boiling over. On the paperwork, CAT still looked legitimate. In the field, it was already a full-time covert carrier. By 1959, the name changed to Air America, because even the CIA knew Civil Air Transport sounded a bit too honest. The new title had a comforting ring, patriotic, benign, almost boring. A logo with eagles sealed the illusion. The agency wanted the world to think it was just another American charter outfit hauling diplomats and mail. What it was really hauling depended on the day and the mission. Inside the operation, the shift from CAT to Air America was more than cosmetic. The CIA poured in new money, new planes, and new missions. Laos, which looked like a postage stamp on the map, was fast becoming a secret laboratory for counterinsurgency. The Geneva Accords of 1954 had declared the country neutral, which meant no foreign troops were supposed to operate there. The CIA read that as send civilians with airplanes. Air America would become their invisible army. The company's structure was a masterpiece of bureaucracy disguised as chaos. There were regional managers, pay scales, and maintenance crews, all designed to look like any other commercial operation. But the chain of command ran straight to Langley. Orders came in coded telexes. Manifests were written in euphemisms. A pilot might be told to deliver agricultural supplies to Mon Village, a polite way of saying crates of 7.62mm ammunition. Still, many of the men flying for CAT and early Air America weren't spooks. They were pilots chasing paychecks and adventure, not ideology. Some had been bomber jocks in the Pacific. Others crop dusted their way through post-war boredom. They joked that the CIA stood for catch it again, as in, if you survive today's mission, you'll catch it again tomorrow. The mix of idealism and cynicism was intoxicating. One day they'd deliver rice to a starving village. The next they'd fly a black op, dropping commandos behind enemy lines. The same aircraft could serve as a Red Cross relief flight in the morning and a weapons mule by nightfall. The official company motto was anything, anytime, anywhere. The unofficial one was, if it fits, it flies. As the Cold War deepened, Air America became indispensable. The CIA could move people and cargo with speed and secrecy that made the regular military jealous. They inserted agents into the jungles of Laos, extracted defectors from North Vietnam, and flew reconnaissance over Cambodia, all under the banner of a commercial airline. Every flight gave Washington another layer of deniability. But with every success came scope creep. Air America soon found itself doing more than the CIA could publicly justify. But in the early 1960s, it wasn't just moving supplies, it was shaping entire conflicts. The airline that started as a refugee lifeline had become a geopolitical instrument, its propellers spinning the fog of war thicker with every sortie. And for the pilots, the transformation didn't feel heroic, it felt weird. They joked about being the world's largest non-existent airline, flying routes no one admitted existed, in a country no one was supposed to be in. Their pay stubs came from a corporation that technically didn't exist, yet they kept flying, because it paid well, and because danger was addictive. The world was about to explode again. Vietnam was heating up, the CIA was expanding its covert empire, and Laos, the so-called Kingdom of a Million Elephants, was about to become the agency's private airfield. Air America was ready for takeoff. If Vietnam was the stage where America performed its tragic opera, then Laos was the backstage where all the illegal lighting rigs, extra props, and forgotten corpses were hidden. Officially, the U.S. wasn't there. Unofficially, the CIA was everywhere, and its favorite airline, Air America, was running the busiest flight schedule in a war no one was supposed to notice. Laos looked peaceful on a map. A thin, landlocked country wedged between Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. But maps are liars. Beneath the canopy of jungle and mist lay one of the most bombed nations on Earth. Between 1964 and 1973, U.S. aircraft dropped over 2 million tons of ordnance there, more than what fell on Germany and Japan combined. Yet Congress never declared war, and the Pentagon denied involvement. The CIA simply called it a paramilitary assistance program. Air America was the lifeline of that invisible war. From airstrips carved into mountain ridges, they supplied local allies, most famously the Hmong guerrillas under General Vang Pao. The mission, at least on paper, was to support the royal Lao government and keep communism from spreading. In practice, it was a secret crusade fought with C-47s, C-123s, and helicopters painted civilian white. The pilots were given two kinds of cargo manifests, one for the paperwork, one for reality. The official version listed rice, medical supplies, and school books. The real list included ammunition, mortar rounds, and occasionally CIA operatives who'd prefer to remain anonymous. To the men flying the missions, it didn't matter what was in the crates, only that it stayed intact long enough to land. Long Tien became the center of it all, a hidden airbase nestled in the Laotian highlands, invisible on maps but busier than some international airports. The place didn't officially exist, but it had bars, brothels, and an air traffic control tower that handled over 400 flights a day. The joke among the pilots was that if you got lost, just look for the mountain with the most wreckage around it. That was Long Tien. The pilots who flew those routes lived by a strange rhythm: dawn takeoffs, jungle landings, and a nightly race against monsoon clouds. They called themselves Air America cowboys. Most had no uniforms, no ranks, and no illusions. One day you might deliver food to starving villagers, the next you'd drop supplies to a CIA-backed militia, wiping out a neighboring tribe. Morality had been traded for efficiency somewhere over the Mekong. Their job was to keep the Hmong supplied, the communists off balance, and the CIA's fingerprints off everything. They succeeded in 2 out of 3. The agency armed the Hmong to the teeth, promised them support as long as it takes. The problem was, the U.S. never told Congress how long that actually was. As the war dragged on, the Hmong became cannon fodder for a cause that even the pilots struggled to define. And through it all, Air America flew. They delivered CIA case officers to remote villages, ferried wounded guerrillas to makeshift hospitals, and airdropped pallets of rice labeled USAID. The line between humanitarian and military blurred until it simply didn't exist. The same plane that delivered food to refugees might return carrying prisoners, or worse, bodies. One veteran pilot later said, "We were part of a secret war, but we didn't know whose secret it was." Another remembered being told to pick up sensitive cargo, only to find cages of wild animals destined for Saigon zoos. For all their bravado, the men in the cockpit were as much in the dark as anyone else. They knew how to fly, they didn't always know why. The danger was constant. The Lao Highlands were a maze of fog and cliffs, and the communist anti-aircraft guns dotted the ridgelines. Pilots learned to fly by instinct, memorizing valleys and rivers, flying low enough to make radar useless, but high enough to avoid tree branches. Some didn't make it. Wrecks littered the jungle, scavenged by locals for aluminum siding. When a plane went down, there were no news stories, no funerals, just a quiet note in the CIA's files marked MIA, civilian contractor. And then there were the barrel drops. When airstrips were too short or under fire, crews rolled barrels of rice, ammo, or fuel out the cargo door mid-flight, hoping they'd land somewhere near the intended coordinates. The pilots joked that accuracy was measured by whether the barrel hit someone friendly or not. If the locals wave, you nailed it. If they shoot, you didn't. The operator's absurdity was matched only by its secrecy. The U.S. ambassador to Laos technically commanded all American operations there, a diplomatic fiction designed to keep the Pentagon's name off the paperwork. Ambassadors became de facto warlords, giving daily flight authorizations for missions that never appeared in public records. It was a war run from embassy basements, fought by civilians, and paid for with black budgets. When the CIA called it Civilian Air Operation, they weren't lying. They were redefining what civilian meant. Air America pilots had no uniforms, no official chain of command, and no Geneva Convention protections. If captured, they were mercenaries. If killed, they were deniable. It was the perfect Cold War invention. Expendable men doing indispensable work for a government that couldn't acknowledge them. By the late 1960s, Air America had become the largest airline in Southeast Asia, bigger than some national carriers. Yet it didn't appear in any commercial registry. It was a ghost empire of propellers and paperwork, built on the quiet understanding that the fewer people who knew, the better. And still, they flew, Because when your paycheck depends on secrecy and your runway depends on good luck, you don't ask questions. You throttle up and pray the engine holds. Laos may have been neutral on paper, but in the sky above it, neutrality had a very short half-life. When the Hmong called Air America pilots sky soldiers, it wasn't meant as praise or accusation, just recognition. In a war where nothing officially existed, the men in those planes were the only thing that did. The men who flew for Air America were a contradiction wrapped in aviation fuel, half idealist, half outlaw, and all adrenaline. They weren't soldiers, they weren't civilians, and they definitely weren't saints. Most had worn a uniform once, Air Force, Navy, Marines, until they realized Uncle Sam had too many rules and the CIA had none. For a certain kind of pilot, that was irresistible. They came from every corner of the post-war world, disillusioned Korean War veterans, adrenaline junkies from Texas crop dusting fields, Brits who missed the empire, Aussies chasing the next paycheck, and more than a few who simply couldn't fly straight in civilian life. Air America was their refuge, their last chance to stay in the sky, and their ticket to trouble. The company didn't recruit so much as absorb misfits. Word spread through pilot bars in Bangkok and Saigon. Good pay, no questions asked. You could make 3 times your military salary if you didn't mind being shot at by people your government swore didn't exist. There were no flight uniforms, no medals, and no official recognition. The only perks were hazard pay, cheap whiskey, and stories too crazy to tell outside the bar. Every man who signed up understood one rule. The less you knew, the safer you were. Missions came with one-sentence briefings like, drop the cargo, don't ask what it is, or pick up 2 passengers, call them civilians. Those civilians often carried weapons, spoke fluent Lao, and answered to nobody. The pilots didn't pry, they just flew. They developed reputations as the best and worst aviators in Southeast Asia. Some could thread a C-123 through a mountain pass in a thunderstorm. Others barely sobered up by takeoff. Their flying was fearless because it had to be. Landing strips were carved out of hillsides or floated on mud. One wrong approach and you were a smoking hole in the jungle. The Air Force called them reckless. They called it Tuesday. There was an Earthquake Magoon who once landed a cargo plane with half of its tail missing. Pappy Smith, who bailed out of 3 aircraft in 2 years and just shrugged when someone asked why he kept coming back. And the legend of Bull Durham, a pilot who allegedly flew an entire mission with a hangover so bad he navigated by smell. The stories were part truth, part myth, and entirely Air America. They drank hard, fought hard, and lived like there was no tomorrow, because there often wasn't. Saigon bars became confessionals for the condemned. One day you'd be sharing a bottle with a fellow pilot, the next you'd hear he'd vanished into the clouds over Laos. There were no funerals, no folded flags, just a rumor that he'd gone missing, probably gone down in bad weather. In the CIA's ledgers, bad weather covered everything from anti-aircraft fire to catastrophic engine failure, or being in the wrong place when politics shifted. For all the chaos, those men had an unspoken code. Get the job done, get everyone home if you can, and don't leave your own behind. When a pilot crashed, recovery wasn't guaranteed, but if there was a chance, Air America crews launched into the storm anyway. They didn't wait for approval, they didn't need permission. They took care of their own, because nobody else would. The bond between pilots and mechanics was its own kind of faith. Maintenance crews worked with scavenged parts, welding together Frankenstein planes from wreckage and scrap. One mechanic claimed you could build an entire C-47 from pieces lying around the Long Tieng airstrip. Maybe he did. No one could prove otherwise. They painted over bullet holes with humor. Instant sunroof. Do not disturb the holes. Property of no one. Gallows humor kept the fear at bay. The locals idolized them and feared them in equal measure. To the Hmong, the Air America pilots were sky gods, reckless, loud, and terrifyingly efficient. They dropped food, medicine, and guns, often in the same flight. Children waved at the silver birds overhead, not realizing those same planes carried death to the next valley. The pilots knew it too, but by then, morality was a luxury no one could afford. Their lifestyle was part Catch-22, part outlaw biker gang with wings. Officially, Air America had policies about drinking and conduct. Unofficially, if you could take off straight and land without exploding, no one cared what you did in between. They were paid per flight hour, so downtime meant boredom, and boredom meant trouble. Gambling rings, bar fights, and bootleg operations were common. Some even ran side hustles, smuggling cigarettes or liquor to remote outposts. In a war where the lines between legal and illegal barely existed, it was hard to tell the difference. Despite the chaos, many of these men believed they were doing something meaningful, fighting communism, saving villagers, helping refugees. And sometimes they really were heroes. There were documented cases of pilots landing under fire to evacuate wounded civilians, or hovering helicopters long enough to load children fleeing the Pathet Lao. Every story of recklessness, there was another of impossible courage. They didn't wear medals, but they earned them 100 times over. Air America's pilots became folk heroes and cautionary tales rolled into one. Their legends grew bigger with every crash that didn't kill them, every mission that shouldn't have worked but did. They were mercenaries by paycheck, patriots by accident, and lunatics by profession. A CIA officer once said, "Those Air America guys, they're the best damn pilots I've ever seen. And if they ever sober up, I might trust them." It wasn't entirely a joke. By the late 1960s, the cowboy culture that defined Air America was both its strength and its curse. They could pull off miracles in the air, but on the ground, they were a PR nightmare waiting to happen. The agency liked their deniability, but feared their unpredictability. Too many journalists were asking questions. Too many rumors were spreading about mystery flights over Laos. And behind all the swagger and adventure, something darker was taking shape in the cargo holds. Something that would haunt the company forever. The next chapter of Air America's story wouldn't be about courage or chaos. It would be about corruption. By 1968, Air America had become the CIA's Swiss Army knife with wings. Part airline, part smuggling ring, part plausible deniability delivery service. Its fleet crisscrossed the skies of Southeast Asia, carrying everything from humanitarian aid to things that went boom. And depending upon who you asked, sometimes things that went sniff. The official story was noble enough. Air America was providing logistical support to the Royal Lao government and humanitarian relief to civilians displaced by the fighting. The unofficial story, the one whispered in bars from Vientiane to Saigon, was that the company was up to its wingtips in the region's most profitable export, opium. The truth, as always, was murkier than either version. Laos was an opium country long before the CIA arrived. The Hmong tribes, America's main allies against the Pathet Lao, grew poppies the way Iowa grows corn. Opium wasn't contraband, it was currency, medicine, and livelihood. The war didn't create the drug trade, it simply industrialized it. The CIA's relationship with the Hmong was built on necessity, not morality. General Vang Pao's fighters were the only reliable anti-communist force in northern Laos, and keeping them armed, fed, and loyal was priority one. If that meant turning a blind eye to the bags of opium occasionally loaded next to the rice sacks, so be it. We needed them more than we needed clean hands, one CIA officer later admitted. Air America pilots swore they didn't traffic drugs, and technically they were right. They just transported whatever their Laotian clients handed them. If those burlap sacks happened to contain raw opium paste, well, nobody opened them mid-flight to check. The pilots weren't customs officers. They were delivery men in a war that wasn't supposed to exist. Rumors spread like jet fuel. French intelligence accused the CIA of running a global narcotics ring. Reporters hinted that Air America planes carried heroin from the Golden Triangle straight to Saigon, where it conveniently ended up in the veins of American soldiers. The agency, of course, denied everything. Their line was simple. Air America was a commercial airline. It didn't inspect cargo. But photographs told another story. Tribal soldiers unloading barrels marked Rice Aid that turned out to be packed with poppy sap. Field reports from agents who described mysterious deliveries arriving at Vang Pao's base in Longtieng. The evidence was circumstantial, but the coincidences stacked high enough to reach cruising altitude. Whether Air America was complicit or simply convenient is still debated. Some historians believe the CIA actively encouraged the trade to fund its secret army, while others argue it merely looked the other way. The pilots themselves claimed ignorance, and most probably were. The flight logs said cargo, and that was good enough. When you're flying through flak over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, you don't stop to weigh the ethics of your payload. The irony was almost poetic. The same aircraft dropping food to refugees might later carry heroin that would destroy soldiers on the ground. Humanitarianism and corruption were literally sharing the same cockpit. That duality became the essence of Air America, an operation where good and evil were just two sides of the same stamped manifest. Not all cargo was narcotic or noble. There were weapons shipments mislabeled as agricultural equipment, and crates of CIA cash intended for influence operations. One pilot recalled being told he was flying medical supplies to a remote base, only to find the cargo bay stacked with body bags. Another remembered a flight full of chickens that turned out to be grenades with feathers glued to the crates, just in case someone got nosy. Every object loaded onto an Air America plane carried a secret. Some were strategic, others personal. Evacuating orphans one week, inserting commandos the next. It was an airborne paradox, a fleet that could deliver salvation and destruction on the same day, sometimes to the same village. The pilots lived with that contradiction. Many justified it as the price of fighting communism. Others drowned it in whiskey. Some didn't justify it at all. They just kept flying, because that's what professionals did. The mission came first. The moral math could wait until after the landing gear locked. The CIA, for its part, played dumb with Olympic precision. Official reports emphasized Air America's humanitarian role, its commitment to the people of Laos, while quietly increasing its budget every year. Congressional oversight was minimal, and what little existed was easily bypassed. The agency's own accounting of Air America's operations read like a bureaucratic haiku. Flights conducted in support of Allied objectives, specifics classified. By the early 1970s, the shadow economy of the war had consumed itself. The heroin flooding Saigon was so pure it made headlines. Addiction rates among U.S. troops skyrocketed. When journalists began asking where the supply was coming from, they found the trail led back to Laos, to Hmong strongholds, to CIA-backed airstrips, and to a fleet of planes with no official existence. The scandal never quite exploded, but the whispers never stopped. Hollywood would later turn it into a punchline, painting Air America as a band of lovable rogues in a messy war. The truth was uglier. For every humanitarian flight the company ran, another blurred the line between service and sin. One Air America mechanic summed it up years later. We flew rice to people who were starving, and sometimes we flew the stuff that made them forget why they were starving. You tell me which one's worse. By 1973, the war in Laos was unraveling, and so was the illusion. The CIA began pulling out, the Hmong were left exposed, and Air America's moral debts were coming due. Its planes still flew, rescue runs, evacuations, anything to keep the gears turning, but the writing was on the fuselage. The skies over Laos were closing in, and soon the airline that wasn't supposed to exist would face the end of the war it was never supposed to be in. By 1975, Southeast Asia was collapsing like a house of cards left out in the monsoon. Vietnam was in chaos, Cambodia was already bleeding under the Khmer Rouge, and Laos, the CIA's secret playground, was coming apart at the seams. The Hmong army had been abandoned, American advisors were vanishing, and the company that had flown the shadows for over a decade was suddenly staring at daylight. Air America had outlived its usefulness. Officially, the airline still existed, headquartered in Washington with glossy brochures and a phone number no one answered. In reality, it was now a refugee shuttle service for a collapsing empire. The missions that once carried diplomats, spies, and weapons now carried civilians, orphans, and anyone lucky enough to fit inside a cargo bay. The irony wasn't lost on the pilots. After years of covert ops, their most dangerous missions were the ones meant to save lives. As the North Vietnamese closed in on Saigon, Air America pilots knew what was coming. They'd seen it already in Laos. Long Tieng, once the beating heart of the CIA's secret war, had fallen in 1974. The evacuation was chaos wrapped in tragedy. Hmong families swarmed the airstrip as Air America planes tried to load whatever they could. C-46s and C-123s overloaded to the point of stalling, taking off with children clinging to landing gear, women holding babies in the aisles, and pilots shouting over the noise, "We're full! We're full!" But there was always room for one more soul desperate to escape. That scene repeated itself across Southeast Asia in the war's final months. At Phnom Penh, Vientiane, and finally Saigon, Air America pilots worked miracles under fire. They evacuated embassy staff, CIA operatives, and civilians while artillery shells landed close enough to rattle the cockpit glass. Every flight was a gamble. Fuel running low, runways overrun, the radio channels clogged with frantic calls for extraction. The U.S. military called their version of this evacuation Operation Frequent Wind. But for the men of Air America, it wasn't an operation, it was muscle memory. They had spent 15 years flying people in and out of wars that didn't officially exist. Now, as the official war ended, they were the ones doing the job no one else could. On April 29, 1975, the final act began. Saigon was surrounded and the city streets were rivers of panic. The U.S. Embassy had become a fortress of desperation. Helicopters buzzed above like angry hornets. Hueys, Chinooks, anything that could lift off the roof. Among them were Air America's distinctive Bell UH-1s and CH-47s, piloted by men who'd spent their entire careers in the gray zone between hero and ghost. They landed on apartment buildings, hotels, and even schoolyards, anywhere with a flat surface and a terrified crowd. One pilot later described it as trying to fly a taxi service through the end of the war. They loaded whoever they could, Americans, South Vietnamese allies, journalists, children, until the helicopters sagged under the weight. Then they lifted off toward the South China Sea, hoping to find an aircraft carrier that still had deck space. The most famous image of that day, the helicopter perched atop a Saigon rooftop, a line of evacuees stretching down a narrow stairway, wasn't a U.S. Army bird. It was an Air America Huey. The pilot, retired Air Force Major Bob Caron, lifted 20 people at a time from the Pittman Apartments to the USS Midway. He made flight after flight until his fuel gauge hit empty, then ditched the chopper into the sea, climbed onto the carrier deck with nothing but its flight suit and exhaustion. In those final hours, Air America became what it had always pretended to be, a lifeline. They ferried orphans from Tan Son Nhut Air Base, rescued stranded embassy workers, and even plucked CIA officers from rooftops under sniper fire. The company's final manifest read like a confession of everything it had been. One part salvation, one part chaos, and a dash of plausible deniability. When the dust settled, Saigon was gone. The Hmong were left behind, and Air America was officially out of business. Within months, the company's assets were sold off, its contracts dissolved, and its pilots scattered to civilian jobs or early graves. The CIA quietly buried the brand. No press conference, no medals, no closure, just silence. But for the men who flew those last missions, the silence was deafening. Many couldn't talk about what they'd seen because they weren't supposed to have been there in the first place. They carried the memories instead, of overloaded helicopters, screaming children, and the sight of Saigon burning beneath them. Years later, one pilot summed it up with grim simplicity. "We didn't win, we didn't lose, we just left." The end of Air America wasn't just the end of a company. It marked the end of an era where the CIA could operate entirely shadow wars behind the curtain. The exposure of covert programs in Laos and Cambodia had embarrassed Washington, and the agency's appetite for deniable air forces began to fade. The next generation of covert ops would trade propellers for satellites, pilots for proxies, and pilots' courage for drones' convenience. But for those who were there, the rogues, the cowboys, the accidental heroes, Air America was something that could never be replaced. It was freedom and madness, tragedy and farce, all at once. They flew for money, for adventure, for loyalty, and sometimes for reasons they couldn't explain. And when it was over, they vanished as quietly as they had appeared, leaving only stories and wreckage behind. The war had consumed them, and when it ended, it erased them. The airline that never existed, flown by men who were never there, in a country that wasn't supposed to be at war. When the guns finally went silent in Southeast Asia, Air America faded with them, quietly, efficiently, and without ceremony. One month it was the CIA's most useful covert tool. The next, it was a liability that needed to disappear. Officially, the company ceased operations in June of 1976. Unofficially, it dissolved into the same bureaucratic ether it had been born from, the perfect ending for an organization that had never technically existed. The pilots went home to blank stares. They couldn't tell anyone what they'd really done, because officially, they hadn't done it. No medals, no veteran benefits, no parades, just silence. The CIA denied any formal connection, and the US government filed their service under civilian contractor. To the world, they were cargo pilots who'd had an interesting job overseas, not combatants in a secret war that killed tens of thousands. Some found work flying bush planes in Alaska or cargo routes in Africa. Others drank their pensions dry. A few stayed in Asia, unwilling or unable to return to a country that pretended they'd never left. Many simply disappeared into the haze of history, their names buried in unmarked files and redacted reports. It might have stayed that way forever, if not for the leaks. By the late 1970s, the post-Watergate world had developed a taste for accountability. Congressional committees began digging into the CIA's covert operations, and inevitably, the subject of Air America surfaced. Lawmakers were stunned. How had an entire airline operated for 2 decades as an arm of the US government without oversight? How many wars had it fought? And how many people had it killed or saved without anyone knowing? The agency's response was a masterpiece of understatement. Air America, they said, had been a logistical support entity, not a combat organization. Its missions were humanitarian in nature. The phrase unconventional support appeared in more than one declassified memo, the bureaucratic equivalent of a wink. When pressed about drug trafficking allegations, officials dismissed them as enemy propaganda. No one mentioned that some of the enemies had worked for the U.S. only months earlier. Public interest spiked, especially when the opium stories resurfaced. Journalists pored over old flight logs, CIA documents, and testimonies from disillusioned pilots. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Wherever Air America went, the local drug trade seemed to thrive. The agency insisted that any involvement was unintentional, that its only mission had been to save lives and promote freedom. In Washington, that line played well enough. In Vientiane and Saigon, it sounded like gallows humor. But history had a sense of irony, and in 1990, Hollywood came calling. The movie Air America hit theaters with Mel Gibson and Robert Downey Jr., 2 actors who perfectly embodied the mixture of charm and dysfunction that defined the real pilots. The film turned the whole saga into a buddy comedy, complete with whiskey bottles, helicopter crashes, and smirking CIA handlers. Audiences loved it, veterans didn't. The real pilots hated the movie with the kind of passion only the betrayed can muster. We weren't clowns, one said. We were professionals doing the impossible. They weren't wrong. The film played for laughs what had been, in reality, a decade of trauma. In Gibson's version, Air America was a mischievous adventure. In truth, it was a grind of moral compromise, where men watched friends die for a paycheck signed by a ghost company. Still, the film did something the CIA never intended. It made Air America famous. People who'd never heard of the secret war suddenly knew the name. And though the Hollywood version was fiction, it cracked open the vault. Reporters and historians began digging deeper. Declassified documents revealed that, yes, Air America had been wholly owned by the CIA through front companies. Yes, it had flown in Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Thailand. And yes, it had performed special operations well beyond civilian jurisdiction. The denials crumbled under the weight of paperwork. The CIA eventually admitted the connection, though not the full extent of what Air America had done. It was easier to let the myth stand. The heroic pilots, the daring rescues, the occasional moral ambiguity. The agency could live with that. The truth, on the other hand, was too messy to fit into a press release. Meanwhile, former employees spent decades lobbying for recognition as veterans. They argued, rightly, that they'd served the U.S. government under military command, risked their lives, and bled for a war that never made the evening news. The government disagreed for 40 years. Only in 2009 did the Department of Defense finally acknowledge that Air America personnel were, in fact, engaged in direct support of U.S. military operations, a polite way of saying they'd been soldiers without uniforms. By then, most of them were old men, long past caring about official recognition. But for a few survivors, the acknowledgement mattered. It wasn't about money or medals, it was about being seen. For decades, they'd been ghosts. Now, at least, someone had finally said their names out loud. The irony of Air America's afterlife is that the truth turned out to be stranger than the propaganda. It wasn't a grand conspiracy or a heroic crusade. It was both and neither. It was the CIA's attempt to privatize warfare before the concept even had a name. It was logistics turned lethal, diplomacy with a propeller. And like most covert operations, it worked right up until the moment it didn't. By the time the credits rolled, in both history and Hollywood, Air America had become legend. Not because it was glorious, but because it was absurd. It embodied everything about America's Cold War schizophrenia, the urge to do good while doing harm, to tell the truth while living a lie, to wage peace with napalm and payloads. And maybe that's why it still fascinates people. Not because it was secret, but because it was so American, ambitious, chaotic, righteous, and tragically blind. The final irony, the CIA never destroyed Air America's records. They just reclassified them under defunct proprietary aviation assets. Somewhere in a government archive, there's still a filing cabinet full of maintenance logs, expense reports, and fuel receipts. The mundane paper trail of an airline that shouldn't have existed, run by men who shouldn't have been there, fighting a war nobody was supposed to remember. If you stand on a mountain ridge in northern Laos at dawn, you can still hear them sometimes. The faint hum of engines that aren't there anymore. Villagers say it's the ghosts of the sky soldiers, the ones who flew where no flag was allowed to fly. It's superstition, sure, but fitting. Air America was built on the things people couldn't see, couldn't say, and weren't supposed to believe. After the war, the jungle took back the runways. Long Tieng is now a ghost town, its rusting hangars swallowed by vines, its runway cracked with roots and time. Old Hmong families still remember the silver planes that dropped rice and rifles in equal measure. Some still keep the faded parachutes, once their lifeline, now repurposed as wedding tents and roof tarps. The legacy of Air America lives on in fragments, stitched into the fabric of people who were never asked what they thought of America's secret war. For the men who flew those missions, life after Air America was quieter but heavier. They had seen the full spectrum of humanity at altitude, mercy and madness, bravery and bureaucracy, compassion and corruption, all crammed into one cargo hold. Many spent years trying to explain it to people who thought they'd made the whole thing up. Others stopped trying altogether. It's hard to tell war stories when the world insists you were never in one. In time, historians tried to make sense of it. The company that wasn't a company, the war that wasn't a war. Some called it an example of American ingenuity. Others called it moral rot with a flight plan. The truth, as always, was somewhere in the middle. Air America was both, a marvel of logistics and a monument to hubris. It proved that the CIA could run an airline better than most governments, and that even the best pilots can't navigate ethics at 10,000 feet. There's no monument for Air America, no wall of names carved in marble, just a few plaques scattered across airfields in Thailand and Virginia, and a handful of gray-haired men who still meet once a year to remember the company that taught them how to vanish. Their motto has always been, anything, anytime, anywhere. It was meant to sound bold, but in hindsight, it reads like a confession, because they really did mean anything. The world moves on, the records gather dust, and the planes are gone. But somewhere over the mountains of Laos, when the wind hits just right, the sky still hums with the memory of an airline that wasn't supposed to exist, and the men who flew into history without leaving a trace. I'm Dave. I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And until next time, stand tall.